Welcome to Global Express, everyone. I hope you've made a point of watching our earlier episodes. Our guest tonight is the distinguished author and academic Professor Amitabh Mattoo. He's a Padma Shri awardee. He's the honorary professor at the University of Melbourne and teaches at JNU. He's a professor at JNU, and he's a byword on Pakistan, China, the United States, and of course Kashmir. And India's foreign policy. So long question short, Professor, how do you interpret Washington's very public rap on Pakistan's knuckles? Was it done to keep India happy? Was it a signal that Pakistan's geopolitical relevance is greatly diminished after US's exit from Afghanistan? And the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri and the new Taliban sort of marching to its own drummer? Or is it a sideswipe at China? Pakistan's no longer the US's cat's paw, but I mean, its relevance is still very much evident. It's right next to Iran, to China, to Afghanistan, and it's a nuclear weapon state. So what is this? Is this a new Pakistan-US equation? Is Pakistan being thrown to the Chinese wolves for now? Has the US government decided that Pakistan is not the #1 priority at the moment?
First of all, Nina, I think I must say I'm delighted to see you in this current avatar. But you're one of the few writers, journalists who understands Pakistan. So it's great to engage with someone who understands the nuances about not so friendly neighbor. Yeah. But let me begin by saying that Pakistan's greatest strength over all these years since 47 was location, location, and location.
Absolutely.
On the one hand, it was India's neighbor, troublesome as it was, but it was also seen as a gateway to the vistas of Central Asia. Earlier on, it was a post to play the great game with Russia and the Soviet Union, and the Cold War as well. And then it was also seen first as a conduit to China, and later on, obviously, seen as a country which is extremely close to China. So geostrategic location was Pakistan's greatest strength. The United States, to be honest, never really cared too much about values in Pakistan. It was interests, geopolitical interests, which guided its policy towards Pakistan and indeed South Asia. Because the larger game was the Cold War played out between 1947 and 1989-90. And Pakistan was easier to manage, was willing to embrace the United States, unlike India, with Nehruvian non-alignment described as John Foster Dulles by John Foster Dulles, Eisenhower's Secretary of State, as immoral. India was seen as troublesome, too messy, too complicated, while Pakistan, location-wise, as well as in terms of its political inclinations, seemed more manageable.
And it also played ball with the US.
Yes, and so it played ball, as well as the fact that even though Pakistan's record on democracy, on human rights, you had the anti-Ahmadiyya riots right in the beginning, you had the pogroms of minorities happening, yes. You had a Praetorian takeover, a military takeover of Pakistan after Liaquat, when Ayub Khan took over power. So it was neither a democracy, nor did it abide by any principles of liberal values, and yet Pakistan was convenient. Yes. And the US, in its Cold War, found it an instrument to play its politics in South, Central Asia, and indeed even in parts beyond South Asia towards East Asia. That relevance
has changed.
That relevance has faded away. The Pakistanis, of course, will tell you the Americans used us and like chewing gum. Although Wrigley's chewing gum is no longer in fashion in the United States, but they used as a chewing gum and threw us away, which in some ways, it's not far from the truth. Pakistan's geostrategic location is no longer such a great strength. In fact, in some ways, it's a liability. It's
Really?
located at a place which became the epicenter of terrorism. Remember,
Yeah.
Osama bin Laden found sanctuary there.
In
Pakistan,
Abbottabad.
the United States no longer is interested in Afghanistan in the manner it was interested, say, about a decade ago or after 9/11, or even during the Cold War in its war with China, war with the Soviet Union.
But the snakes, as they say, in Pakistan's
Yeah, as
backyard
long
are
as the
still operating.
snakes, yeah, as long as the snakes are not going to bite the United States, they couldn't give.
A
No, I mean,
toss.
it's not fair to say that they couldn't give a toss, but they are less willing to engage directly with the situation, which is so messy. On the other hand, Pakistan is now has a deep entrenched relationship with US's biggest global rival, the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
Pakistan and the Chinese described as we are all weather allies. Beijing
Mm.
and Islamabad have repeatedly defined their relationship as being of all as being one which will have a relationship, whether it's in good times or in bad times. Now, that relationship was an important instrument when Kissinger wanted to make an opening to
Right.
China. He used Rawalpindi and Islamabad as a conduit to go to Beijing secretly and reach out to Mao Zedong. But today, Pakistan's close relationship with China is a source of trouble. Pakistan on the west, if that's the problem with the east, on one hand with China, and on the other hand with South Asia, with India, it has a zero-sum game. I mean,
Mm.
the Americans understand that. On the
Mm.
West itself, also history still seems to have passed Pakistan by. If you look at the concord or the détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and
Yeah.
the
Historic.
crown prince's new reformist modernist tendencies, Mohammed bin Sultan's, which you probably understand much better than most people in India. Given all that happening, given the mess that exists in Pakistan today, its collapsing economy, its near civil war situation a few weeks ago with Imran Khan drumming up populist support against the army, with the army exercising control, with factional sectarian tendencies on the rise, who wants to deal with a Pakistan which still seems to be really almost at not recovered from its antediluvian past?
But I mean, as an Islamic nation, it does get a full support from the Emirates and from Saudi Arabia, and that's not going to change. But what is interesting is that the US, I mean, that's what I want to get at. Why would the State Department and and that statement that was the joint statement by Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden actually specifically deal with talk about terrorism? I mean, is it really such an issue? Because do they're not supporting terror. In fact, they're facing the brunt of it. I think the snakes in their backyard have come back to bite Pakistan in the form of the raids that are being conducted in Waziristan, and the refusal of young people to even join the army to fight this kind of battle, which once upon, I mean, even 15 years ago was part and parcel of life in the northwest frontier. I mean, sorry, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
You see, what I've given you is a broad brush view of the landscape, the geopolitical landscape. The granular reality, as you suggested, is different. Doesn't mean that America will completely disconnect from Pakistan. It will continue its relationship, including the strong relationship within the agencies and within the defense departments. That is still a strong relationship. Similarly, the Emirates and other countries within the Gulf will continue to engage, provide support. Pakistan's diaspora or its military personnel will continue providing support of some kind to many of these fragile states. Having said that,
so it's not just to keep India happy.
It's not just to keep India happy, but it's also, you look at the way in which the United States has decided to invest in the Indian relationship. Now, what is clear with the Modi government is that every major country has to, in some ways, pass the Pakistan and terrorism test,
Yes.
which means simply saying that if on Pakistan and on terrorism, you're not willing to explicitly, clearly say that this is condemnable and that there is no space, no room for negotiation on terrorism and terrorist organizations, then India's relationship is going to be equally lukewarm. In other words, it is a zero-sum situation as far as India is concerned. If you don't condemn the Lashkar, if you don't condemn the Harkat, you don't condemn the Jaish, you don't condemn the Hizbul Mujahideen, we will not play ball to the extent that you want to play ball with us. So I think, frankly, my reading is that Dr. Jaishankar, the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, and don't underestimate the importance of national security advisors. After all, your uncle was one national security advisor who was
My
also
husband's uncle.
your husband's uncle, even better. Okay, was a national security advisor. But so national security advisors, especially on issues of terrorism, can be extremely firm. And so Ajit Doval and Jaishankar must have insisted, along with, of course, the imprimatur and blessings of Prime Minister Modi, that unless the United States and Washington are willing to actually condemn in the strongest possible terms terrorists and terrorist prescribed organizations, everything else pales in significance. Obviously, there is a domestic lobby and a domestic constituency here as well, which Prime Minister Modi is aware of. The others are not political
Yes.
animals. Prime Minister Modi understands how, in some ways, the great resonance.
In fact, the backroom channel. In fact, there is a backroom channel that you mentioned, the national security, the advisor. He did hold 3 rounds of talks with, with Colonel Faiz Hamid, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, who was the former ISI chief in Imran Khan's government. And I know for a fact, because it was shared with a group of journalists, Pakistani journalists, some of that was shared by General Bajwa, the former Pakistan army chief. It's never been confirmed by the Indian government, but that they would put Kashmir on hold, that they would not rake it up at every occasion. And that hasn't really held so far. Nasty attack by both Hina Rabbani Khan, the junior foreign minister, and the foreign minister himself, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, on India, on Kashmir, when they completely forget that it was their infiltration, although that is also down to a great extent, which actually ratchets up the terror quotient and the tension. So do you see some kind of some kind of forcible where Pakistan will be forced to look at things a little differently? Will they review it? Will the army now have to look at where they're going with this constant infiltration, and even if it has dropped? I mean, given the fact that the army itself has lost its funding even from the US government.
Yeah. You see, it's an interesting fact that if you remember that old cliche about Pakistan, the old cliche about Pakistan used to be, it's a terrible cliche. It's been often repeated too often for it to make any sense, that Pakistan is dependent on the 3 A's: Allah, America, and the army.
Yes.
Allah seems to have quite simply almost given up on Pakistan. America, as you pointed out, and which has been the peg on which our discussions rest, has almost disconnected. The army is the only professional organization which is knitting Pakistan together, which is knitting Muhammad Ali Jinnah's moth-eaten Pakistan together. And it is a pragmatic organization which recognizes that given the scale of internal problems, there was no question of having another front with India.
No,
So
that's right.
within Pakistan, there is a tendency where there are people who are beginning to believe that this whole idea that the only cement which holds Pakistan together, and especially the only cement which holds the Pakistani army together and gives it importance, is enmity with India, is an idea which is past its live by date,
Yes, that's true.
use by date.
Yeah.
And General Bajwa and his ISI chief were those who recognized it and actually said it explicitly to journalists like Hamid Mir and others. Said essentially, look, you cannot continue with having a war with India, war as a mindset, war as a reality. And in Pakistan, on Kashmir, the status quo will prevail. You put it on the back burner. You accept the fact that there will be that 370 has been demolished, or 370 is
So
history.
before we get to Kashmir, can I
Yeah.
just ask you? Now there is a new general in charge, Asim Munir, and he's following the same path to a great extent. And yet, I just feel that in bringing in a new government, I mean they have sort of decapitated Imran Khan and his rebellion and so on and so forth, and attacked the army former generals who support him and their families. But to a great extent, I also feel that raison d'etre of the army does to a certain extent continue, because you have Shehbaz Sharif also saying no talks until Kashmir is settled. So they have a bugbear about Kashmir, which we have approached them. I mean, we have given them a kind of an answer by saying that Article 371, which is in the northeastern states, will be brought into Kashmir. Why is it that we have tarried? What is it that is bringing us? I mean, and the other thing which always strikes me is that Kashmir is no longer relevant even to the ordinary Pakistani. For him, it's bread and butter, which matters. Would you agree with that?
See, there are two parts of the Kashmir problem. The internal part, which India, New Delhi, believes it has resolved after the integration that took place in 2019, August 2019. But there is an external dimension purely from the fact that Pakistan still has instrumentalities and tools by which it can disrupt peace in Jammu and Kashmir. It has actors, non-state actors. It can disrupt peace on the LOC. And that's why the Dole Hamid talks was so audacious, because they were able to first think of the big idea, secondly, ensure that the LOC, there was a ceasefire on the LOC, and thirdly, arrive at something which is a bit of a face saver for exactly those elements that you talk about, who still think that that Kashmir is their jugular vein,
Mm,
and Shahrag, as they used to call it.
yes.
That this is so, as a way of letting those people understand that yes, we got something back. This was a carrot which was dangled, and also as a kind of way of arriving at a final settlement to ensure that all the borders are at peace. Internally, there is a great deal of stability, and then you can have elections and a government in place in Jammu and Kashmir. I think that is what was important and significant. And the fact, as was mentioned, as you pointed out, that Prime Minister Modi could potentially have visited Pakistan in 2021 if there hadn't been political changes. That was during Imran Khan's premiership,
Yes,
prime
yes.
ministership.
Yeah,
Now,
I
I
don't
think,
understand what
I
drove
think
him to.
Shahbaz and Munir, General Munir, is a protege of Bajwa. He is just finding his feet, consolidating himself. The writing is clear on the wall as far as the Pakistani army goes. There will be, of course, zealots and jihadis who were a direct result of the policies that General Zia introduced within the Pakistani army, where it no longer had the spirit, the core of the British Indian Army, but was Islamized. But there are those tendencies. But in terms of the chiefs, I think they're clear that the writing on the wall is that there is no other way but to find some degree of a modus vivendi with India. Now,
And in
Shahbaz
fact,
himself,
in
beg your pardon.
fact,
Yeah, go
Shahbaz
ahead.
Sharif is I think also pandering to a non-existent voter base, because I mean look at what happened in Pakistan occupied Kashmir a couple of days ago, where there were protests on the streets where people were saying that their children were being abducted and they would by terrorists, and they would no longer allow that. That I thought was quite an eye opener, because I mean I've seen that in Kashmir itself.
Absolutely, you can see it. I mean, any person who's observing the realities understands that while there might be disaffection within the valley of a certain extent, but in terms of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, there is almost the tendencies which could create or generate a rebellion there. And because it's being treated almost like a colony. So, frankly speaking, I think Shahbaz doesn't have the same political instincts as his brother.
Mm.
He's being cautious, as has General Munir. But if in the months to come, by October, when the elections and a new prime minister is in place, and by all indications, it will be Nawaz Sharif, because Imran has lost out. If Nawaz Sharif, and because now that disqualification, there is a time limit on that, so now Nawaz could come back. Now, Nawaz understands both
And,
politics and
and
economics
India. And he understands
and
India.
India. And remember, Nawaz is the one who initially made that opening to India. If you remember Male, when he met
I
Prime Minister
remember.
Gujral, he
Yes.
said in Punjabi, in Chase Punjabi, and I'll translate it for your South Indian viewership in a second, but he says, Gujral साहब मैं जानदा हूं तो तुसी मैनू कश्मीर दे नहीं सकते मैं तोड़े कोल कश्मीर ले नहीं सकता लेकिन गल होनी चाहिए I know that you cannot give me Kashmir, and I know I cannot take Kashmir away from you by force. But let's keep speaking. Guftugu bandana ho. Let's keep the dialogue open. That
He's a very,
is,
very perceptive
and
man.
he's the one who got people like other business people like Mia Mansha and other business families working together. In fact, there was talk at that stage, if you remember, at the track two level, that the Reliance and their monies were keen to make
Yes.
peace between the borders, given that the Jamnagar refinery
And the
was,
Jindals.
and the Jindal, Sajan Jindal, of course, was thought of as an emissary to Pakistan as well. Let me also say that it's since we are talking about Pakistan, I do want to at this moment offer my condolences at the passing away of one of the great entrepreneurs in Pakistan in this great Titan submarine,
I know.
Shahzad Dawood and his young son. Great people. These are the kind of entrepreneurs, business people who have a forward view of India-Pakistan relations, who Nawaz can mobilize in the cause of finding a way forward. Because otherwise, everyone seems to think Pakistan has a lost cause. The IMF thinks of it. Washington has passed it by. Even the Gulf is going to pass it by, even though you say there are obviously tendencies within the Gulf which would still see
No, they're
Pakistan.
investing in the ports. The
Yeah,
Emirates is
yeah,
investing in the
yeah,
ports, which is a
yeah.
good step.
Yeah, good step. And let's
So
hope that investment will lead to Pakistan seeing good sense. You began by asking me, Nina, what is its greatest strength? Pakistan's greatest strength. I said location, location, location. But the greatest tragedy of Pakistan was also location, location, location. Because when the Muslim League actually asked for the idea of Pakistan, it was born in the hearts and minds of the people who were in UP and Bihar and led by Jinnah, essentially the Muhajirs. And it was created in the states where there was virtually no demand for partition, no demand for Pakistan, because where Muslims were in a majority, they didn't feel the sense of insecurity that Muslims in UP and Bihar and perhaps parts of Bengal felt.
yeah,
So
yeah.
remember that the
Interesting
Unionist
point.
Party in Punjab had defeated the Muslim League in 1937. Even later, in the 1945 elections, Muslim League couldn't get a majority within Punjab. The Greater Sindh movement was more important than the Muslim League in Sindh. In the
Fascinating.
frontier, it was Khan Ghaffar Khan and the Baluchis. In any case, the Manghels and the Buktis used to run their own fiefdoms and empires. So Pakistan's greatest strength and its greatest tragedy are both location.
Fascinating. Tell me, can we just look at Kashmir now? I mean, in the sense you have the Abdullahs, you have Mehbooba Mufti, all of these people who say they're willing to fight the elections, and yet for some reason there is a time lag between the promise and this thing. What is it that is holding us back from holding elections? Is it because the BJP is not ready? Is it because is it because it feels that it may not win? And does it really matter whether they win or not? I mean, the idea is to empower the Kashmiri, and give him a sense of belonging to the Indian, union.
I mean, Nina, you and I are on exactly the same page here. Early elections, return of democracy, empowerment of the people of Jammu and Kashmir from the grassroots level to the state assembly is the long-term way of demonstrating to ourselves and the world that peace and stability and prosperity has been restored to Jammu and Kashmir. And I, for one, would hope that the elections are held at the earliest date possible. And let this be as happened in 1977 when Morarji Desai ensured that there was free and fair elections in every sense of the term, and whoever wins comes to power.
So what happens to people
So,
like the Hurriyat, the Mirwais Umar Farooq, and Yasin Malik, who's on death row? I mean, do these elements that were so patently pro-Pakistan, do they have a role to play at all? Do they have a following, or is that over?
I mean, that is, of course, something which we will know on the poll. But, the tragedy of history is when you don't recognize it. There's just a tiny line or a tiny difference between becoming irrelevant and becoming the most important. When these separatist elements were dealing with Prime Minister Vajpayee and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, they were on such a high horse. They wouldn't even meet with negotiators. I remember the National Security Advisor, Mr. Narayanan, said, my niece can meet all the Hurriyat leaders, and yet they have the audacity to say that they can't meet the government of India. But that's when they thought that they were rulers of an empire. Today, no one will speak to them.
They were also in negotiations with Pakistani interlocutors. There was some
Exactly.
kind of
And they were seen as
backroom.
instruments of Pakistan. Unfortunately, they're responsible for their own irrelevance. Now, I don't know what the state of the Mirwais is, because, of course, he has a religious sanctity and a following, but there's not a squeak from him these days. I can only wish him good health, but I frankly think that they've been completely declared irrelevant, marginalized. Having said that, I think as far as the elections are concerned, anyone who swears by the Indian Constitution and swears by being a true Indian loyal citizen should be allowed to participate in the elections, and let the elections be free and fair, and whoever comes to power take charge.
What
The
about
cynical
Article
explanation
35A?
the cynical explanation is, of course, that the BJP is not confident that they will win the majority, so that's why they're postponing the election. I do not believe that Prime Minister Modi, who ultimately has a vision of India's future, who has been able to take hard decisions, primarily because he actually believes that the time had come for hard decisions, would let partisan politics dictate what happens in Jammu and Kashmir. After all, there was a PDP-BJP government which was removed, or the BJP withdrew support, even though they were in power, equal partners in that arrangement. The second explanation is that perhaps you want a little more time before all the laws or before the situation on ground reaches a point of no return, whereby the center will have introduced the kind of legislation, also introduce the kind of development schemes which cannot be overturned by any rash populist decisions. The third is the fact that they want to make some incremental changes in terms of perhaps return to statehood, perhaps a 371A. And if what you said is right, then perhaps that this could be the final settlement arrived with Pakistan as a party, and for ensuring that internally and externally there's peace guaranteed for at least the next generation. Because beyond the next
I have a
generation, we
question
really don't.
about this Article 35A, the
Yeah.
one which opens it up to investment, buying land from by non-Kashmiris. Does that sit well with people in Kashmir, or is it an irritant?
I mean, psychologically, it is an irritant, and I think there should be ways in which you can ensure that land for investment doesn't mean land alienation for the people on the ground there. But in reality, as far as I understand, there are very few people who are going to
That's
buying
right.
land to set up residences because, ultimately, for any middle class Indian to invest even in a second residence in Kashmir is a huge leap of faith. You might do it in Himachal, you might do it in UP, in the Uttarakhand, even as a summer residence. So I don't think that there's a flood of people coming in. So there is that scare or that fear hasn't translated into reality. However, I think there have to be guarantees in terms of ensuring that there isn't land alienation, that people are not forced or persuaded or in some ways bribed into selling their land. And there are guarantees like the ones which are in Himachal Pradesh. You non-Himachalis
Exactly.
can't buy land. Similarly, in the Northeast, you can't
Yeah.
buy land. Uh,
Yeah. On
however,
this issue on China, I read a story in one of these newspapers the other day, which basically, it was a bit troubling. It talked about China laying underground cables along the LOC. So it's not limiting itself to the line of actual control, it's also interfering in the LOC. I don't know whether it's a factual story. It was put out by PTI, but it's saying that it's providing unmanned aerial vehicles to the Pakistan army, to setting up communication towers, and that Pakistan has bought and deployed, these Chinese-made 150 truck-mounted howitzers. So, doesn't that also isn't that also a troubling, narrative for us? Because if the Pakistan army, as you and I agree, want to keep its eastern border with India, quiet, this does not point to that at all.
I normally don't believe conspiracy theories, but increasingly every conspiracy theory about the Chinese seems to come true. And so I wouldn't put it past them as a way of irritating India, as a way of boxing in India, as well as a way of trying to demonstrate to the Pakistani that they're all-weather friendship will mean that they will actually give them access to all sorts of technology, including nuclear technology in the past, but technology of unmanned vehicles and so on. It is troublesome. There are going to be tendencies like this. As I said, the broad brush should not hide away from the granular realities. So these things are happening, and that's why it's important. While it's not easy, you cannot disconnect Pakistan from China easily, but that you find the contradictions by which you can try and ensure that there are cracks. And one of the ways is to try and provide the kind of incentives and sanctions, also sanctions, to ensure that Pakistan realizes that it is going to be in the dustbin of history. That everyone in any case thinks that the partition was the biggest mistake that happened to the Indian subcontinent, but that Pakistan will be a living proof of that mistake of 1947 for the citizens of Pakistan more than anyone else.
So before we conclude this absolutely fascinating session, Professor, I wanted to draw, bare your soul. I mean, you're a Kashmiri, you're a Pandit. What does it feel, feel like to be at this juncture in history, where we are actually poised to see a greater integration of Kashmir, or not? What do you see happening?
My relationship with Kashmir is a product of a huge amount of nostalgia, some degree of analysis, and an overwhelming sense of passion. Uh, the academic part is probably the least important. I've read histories, I've read almost every major work on Kashmir, but that's not important. Nostalgia is there because I remember a time when we used to cycle from our house in Gokchi Bagh in Srinagar to Burnhall School,
Wow.
which is an Irish Catholic school, but still exists. But you had Irish principals, Father Jones, Father Farrow, who would, and we would say the Lord's Prayer together, Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, all together.
Lovely.
There was perhaps a certain recognition of some difference, but that difference didn't matter. Ghulam Muhammad used to come from our house at lunch break to serve us lunch of rice and vegetables and mutton. And Ahada used to do it with the Drabus who used to come, and we used to sit down together for lunch every day at the grounds of Burnhall School. That nostalgia has left a deep impression on me because I grew up in those years when Kashmir was really paradise. Uh,
Yeah.
was Kashmir, the Kashmiriyat was a lived reality in every home, in every part of the valley.
So do you see
And,
that coming back? Because I mean,
and
I
that's
got
the
a call
passionate
from
part. That's
I
the
got a
passion.
call from one of my friends who lives in Uri, and he said, "Why aren't you here? The G20 summit is going on. Everything is wonderful. Why aren't you here?"
The passion part is it's a small passion. I do want there to be a process of reconciliation between my community, the Kashmiri Pandits, who are agreed for all the right reasons. No one leaves their home and hearths voluntarily. The manner in which the exodus in the 90s happened is shameful.
Absolutely.
And similarly, all through these 30 years, the Muslims on the valley have lived troubled lives full of violence and full of all the kind of hostilities that you have to bear when there is almost an actual war on the ground. The day the Kashmiri Pandit begins to feel for the pain of the Kashmiri Muslims, and the day Kashmiri Muslim puts himself in the position of the Kashmiri Pandit, rather than both communities living in denial about each other, rather than the Muslims saying, oh, it's Jagmohan who organized their exodus, if Jagmohan was some kind of a deity who everyone would follow, or a Pied Piper who everyone would follow. And similarly, to recognize that the ordinary Kashmiri Muslim was neither a militant nor a Pakistani agent. He may not have loved India with the same affection that Kashmiri Pandits did, but there was a certain semblance of peace and stability, and you lived together as you did for thousands of years. So that's
Let's
the
hope,
one
let's
which
hope
I
it
want
comes
to.
back.
And I hope the Pandits can go back incrementally. It's a tragedy that we are not going back. If the central government had to put all their energies in one policy today, it would be to try and ensure the respectable, dignified return of the Kashmiri Pandits, men, women, and children, no matter what it takes. And that is the challenge before the Indian Union, because that ultimately will be the real test of peace, when a Kashmiri Pandit woman can walk from Zana Kadal to Lal Chowk on her own, as she could with her dijoro, her wedding signs, which is really a jewelry made of gold, without any sense of fear, and commanding all the respect of the people around her.
On that note, I think we should conclude the session. Thank you so much. I absolutely enjoyed it. Take care. Thank you so much.